Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Iowa State Cyclones Live here on the Voice of College Football Network. I'm your host, Levi Stevenson, also the managing editor over at Wide Right Natty Light. Hope everybody is having a good time. Cyclones are 3-0 after getting another win this past weekend over Iowa in the CYHAWK series. You'll have to excuse me once in a while. I might have to cough just a second. I'm just on the very, very back end of a little cold, so my voice is still a little hoarse, but we're gonna work through it. Obviously today we'll talk about the game this past Saturday, kind of my takeaways from that, and we will also talk a little bit about Arkansas State towards the end. As always, appreciate anybody that wants to chime in in the comments section. Really appreciate fucking Cyclone State bitches. Really appreciate any interaction in the chat. More than happy to answer questions and all that good stuff as well. So let's talk a little bit about the game. So Iowa State comes away with the 16-13 win over Iowa. Iowa State has still yet to trail this season. Got out to a 3-0 lead, then kind of just played back and forth with Iowa a little bit. Eventually got out to a 13-3 lead after a couple field goals and a Ben Bramer touchdown. Then Iowa started to work their way back. Got a touchdown on a long drive right before the end of the first half, and made it 13-10 at halftime. Then went on another long drive right after halftime when they got the ball on the kickoff after halftime. It was like 8 or 9 minutes, something long, but Iowa State ended up holding them to a field goal where they tied it at 13. Then the two teams traded punts for a little bit, and eventually, about 5.5 minutes left, Iowa State gets the ball back, and Rocco and the boys just kind of methodically drive their way down the field with the help of a couple kind of pretty miraculous plays on the way down, which we'll talk about a little bit too. But then posted up for a 54-yard field goal, which Kyle Conradi drained yet again to win yet another CYHAWK game. But that was not before. That was with about 2 minutes left in the game. And when Iowa took the ball over, they got about a 5-yard completion over the middle of the field. And then Tamatoa McDonough, the transfer from Yale, managed to sack Mark Gronowski on 2 consecutive plays to get to Iowa to 4th and very, very long. And right after that, Iowa State got basically Iowa just had to run around. Gronowski had to run around, basically just try to find somebody, got the incompletion, and locked up the game from there. It was, as the Dukester says, indeed, same old CYHAWK. Yeah, so Daryl, I promise you I'm not forgetting about this. We will go back and we're going to talk about this. So the first half really started out for Iowa State pretty well. They're moving the ball about as well as you could expect them to against a defense like Iowa's that has a good front seven. But just couldn't quite finish out drives on a couple occasions. The touchdown came after Jeremiah Cooper interception after Caden Weege, Iowa's receiver, slipped, and then Jeremiah jumped the route and started returning it. And frankly, I was a little bit surprised he didn't try to return it for a touchdown. I mean, it seemed like he had a pretty easy lane there. He ended up running out of bounds at about the 20-yard line, but either way, got the turnover, and then Iowa State was able to punch in the end zone. Not punch in the end zone. Iowa State was able to get into the end zone via the classic Ben Bramer just mossing a dude in the end zone play that Iowa State's been running a bunch this season. If you remember last week, I said Phil Parker's game plan this week. Phil Parker needs to figure out, last week was essentially what the hell he's going to do when Iowa State is eventually able to get Ben Bramer or Gabe Burkle matched up on a 6 foot or shorter defensive back, and how they're going to deal with that. And sure as shit, Iowa State's only touchdown of the game came when Iowa State got Ben Bramer matched up on a safety who was not tall enough to deal with any of that. And Ben Bramer pretty much just reached over him and grabbed it, and it was it. Ike says I had to pace myself drinking during the game, had to leave for a wedding immediately after. We get there and it's a dry wedding. Oh my God. Well, I guess at least you went to a dry wedding, but at least you didn't have to do that after losing the game. that would be a much worse situation. But Iowa, Iowa's first, I would argue the first 10 points Iowa had in this game were largely gifted to them. Um, the first turnover, Iowa State's only turnover of the game, was on a punt that was ruled as a muff punt, but originally it was ruled as kick catch interference, and then the flag was picked up by the official and then reviewed to see who touched it first and all this. They eventually ruled it as a fumble, which Iowa recovered. And I tell you what, watching that thing live pissed me off. It looked like a very clear kick catch interference. The argument was that he was blocked into Townsend, except for that isn't possible because Iowa State's blocker was between the defender and Townsend. I mean, unless Iowa State's blocker was pulling him into Townsend, which would be crazy. That wouldn't even make any sense why you would do that. It's not possible for him to have gotten blocked into Townsend. And I mean, it was a maddening call that made no sense. Townsend even, you can even see it too. Like right as they got there, I was its blocker. I can't remember who it was, but kind of squeaked out of the way a little bit too. Like, I mean, he couldn't have. It's not possible for him to have done something to force the Iowa gunner into Townsend. It's very clear kick catch interference. It is what it is, I guess. They were able to go down and get their and go down and get some points. It was pretty irritating. They, I would state held them to, they held them to a field goal, but they should have never been in range for a field goal. It should have been Iowa State ball. They should have been going back the other direction. And unfortunately, that whole sequence there felt like it kind of sapped a lot of the momentum that Iowa State had at the time. Granted, it was only a 3-0 game. It was only a 6-0 game at the time, but it was still, it took the wind out of Iowa State's sails. It put Iowa immediately into field goal position. It was really frustrating. That should not have happened. Iowa should not have been given that 3 points. Just shouldn't have happened. But I think really what really felt like the part of the game where I think momentum really started to turn. So Iowa State got the interception. Jeremiah Cooper got the interception and returned it. And then, obviously got the Ben Bramer touchdown in the end zone to make it 13-3. Then Iowa goes on this 4-minute drive. It's about for 85 yards. And on that drive, they are gifted quite a generous spot on a third down. Mark Gronowski, keeper, he runs right into the defensive line of Iowa State, which we should give a shout out to them. They played extremely well last Saturday. He ran right into the line. His helmet was about half a yard short when he got hit, and you can't really see it too much inside the pile. But then Mark Gronowski appears about 3 yards behind where he was because he got hit so hard. And it's really difficult to come up with how that ball somehow appeared, how that ball was somehow spotted, half a yard to a full yard forward from where Mark Gronowski was hit, given that he went directly backwards when he was hit. Physics makes that largely an impossibility. And so they got a free first down there. They would have gotten a field goal out of that probably. So you could argue that they could have kept that field goal and kept it, and instead of 13-0 at that point, it would have been 13-3. And it's just, I would agree. Iowa got a few generous spots throughout there, but Yeah, in my mind, Iowa State should have been up 13-0 at halftime. It should have been a 13-0 ball game at halftime. Yeah, a lot of space time fuckery happening in this game. It seems. Yeah, um, it's just balls somehow being spotted about a yard forward of where they were, where they ended up. Very strange things happening. You get to the second half. Iowa State has a quick punt, and Iowa ends up going. So Iowa State punted to Caden Weegan, who received the ball and then ran backwards and was hit at the 5-yard line. And then Iowa was also whistled for a holding call. Now, what was confusing here is they said half the distance to the goal. And I've heard two different stories of this. That the story I've heard is that Iowa State declined the penalty. I could be wrong on the rules interpretation here, but I believe that penalty should have been enforced from the end of the kick, not from the spot of the foul. And in that case, it should have been like the 2.5-yard line instead of the 5-yard line. But either way, Iowa started the drive on their own 5-yard line and proceeded to just nickel and dime Iowa State all the way down the field. Just picked up, third downs by 1 yard. Just kept going and going and going. Drive lasted 9.5 minutes. They went 77 yards. And eventually Iowa State finally bowed up a little bit, got the stop. I mean, this drive summary is insane. It's 3-yard run, 22-yard pass, 11-yard run, 3-yard run, 7-yard pass, 6-yard run, 2-yard run, 1-yard run, 3-yard run, 4-yard run, 4-yard run, 3-yard run, 3-yard run, 4-yard run, 1-yard run. That's some Army bullshit right there. Also on that drive, funny enough, on that drive, we also saw 2 different times Iowa decided to run some Wake Forest slow mesh bullshit. So I don't know if anybody had that on your bingo card, but with Iowa running some slow mesh, but it fortunately didn't really work out too much for them. I think that was the 6-yard run from Mark Gronowski. The linebackers really didn't bite on it at all. Fortunately, Iowa State bowed up. They kicked a field goal. Iowa tied it up at 13. Then from there, I think Iowa State did a good job of, like, at that point, your defense is exhausted. They've just endured like 16 minutes consecutively of Iowa just doing nothing on offense, but just 3-4 yards at a time for like 16 minutes of 16 minutes of game time. So Duke Sutter said it actually did work decently, the mesh plays. I mean, the problem is I would just flat stop running them. So yes and no. The first one only worked because Mark Gronowski scrambled out. He scrambled out to his left and got like 6 or 7 yards or something like that. But the reason I say Iowa State defended it fairly well is because on that stuff, because the interaction between the quarterback and the running back takes so long, it's really easy for the linebackers to accidentally, bail one way or the other, either crash in on the run or drop back on the pass. But for the most part, the way to defend slow mesh is you just stay home. And you maybe back up just a touch, but for the most part, you stay home as a linebacker, and that's how you defend the slow mesh. And Iowa State did that really well. They did that really, really well without there's no way they could have known that was coming. I doubt that was ever on tape. Iowa was trying to catch Iowa State off guard with some weird shit that has never been on Iowa's tape ever. You would never expect them to run slow mesh. It's kind of it was a weird deal out of nowhere, but Iowa State defended it on the fly about as well as they could have. But where I think Iowa State did a good job of kind of recapturing momentum after I had clearly lost a bunch and been a little exhausted. It was a punt, but they got the ball. This would have been like the end of the third quarter, beginning of the fourth quarter type of deal. It was a 12-play, 53-yard drive for 6 minutes. So Iowa State took over at their own 3-yard line. They're backed up in their own end zone, and they just kind of slowly drove their way out. out to midfield. They got they actually got across to midfield, to the Iowa 44, then had to punt, and Caden Weegan fielded it at the 11. Being able to turn your own 3 into the other team's 11-yard line is classic Kirk Ferentz owning field position way to win a football game. Being able to completely flip the field on that drive, and because being backed up to your own 3, if you go 3 and out there, you're hoping to get the punt across midfield, and you're hoping to make Iowa drive, you're hoping to make Iowa drive 50 yards for a touchdown or something like that. But they really only got to go probably 15 yards, maybe 10 or 15 yards to be in field goal range and to be able to get points. But being able to flip the field and make Iowa go 89 yards to get a touchdown, that was, to me, that's how you stop the bleeding. That's how you get things back on track, because Iowa's offense had a drive there where they kind of nickel and dimed it, but they didn't really have any sort of explosive plays. The offense still wasn't really working at all. I mean, it was working better than it did to start, where Iowa began the game with maybe the most befuddling offensive scheme I've ever seen in my life, to start with. I mean, they just didn't do anything. Matthew, so this show became a thing last December, and we've been doing it once a week ever since. And we also are doing post-game stuff too. So welcome. I mean, to put it this way, here's Iowa's first 2 drives were stunning. So the first one was 3 plays for 9 yards, punted. The second drive was 3 plays for -3 yards, but they got a first down. Iowa managed to lose total yards on a drive while getting a first down. That's how bad the Iowa offense was to start this game. Through 3 drives, they had run 12 plays and accumulated 5 yards of offense. Up until that muff punt, the bullshit kick kind of interference that was picked up, Iowa was on 12 plays for 5 yards. That's how Iowa started this game. Now, credit to Tim Lester for at least trying something a little different and getting a little bit going. Not a lot, but more than 0.4 yards a play. But Iowa takes the ball back over, 7-play, 40-yard drive with 5 minutes left. I would say it's finally kind of bowing up a little bit. And even after a pass interference call on Bo Goodwin down the field, which frankly may have saved a touchdown, Iowa stalls out not long after that. Iowa State takes the ball over with 6:29 on the clock, and as we mentioned, goes on this nice little drive. And they're starting off kind of whatever, just doing a few different things. But kind of 2 remarkable plays happened on this drive. One, they got to a 3rd and 1. Or 3rd and 2. 3rd and 2. And earlier, I should say, the deflection happened first. So this has been like the 3rd, 4th play of the drive. Iowa State's running a smash concept, which is the tight end lined up right off of the tackle. And then, trying to figure out how to do this on the camera. Basically, you have Gabe Burkle lined up right off of the tackle. So tackle's here, Gabe Burkle's here. And then Townsend, tackle Burkle. Townsend's lined up here. Burkle is supposed to go on a corner route to the outside. Townsend is going to come in here on a spot route, which looks like it starts out looking like a slant, and then he just stops. So what that's supposed to do is basically Gabe Burkle is going to take a linebacker and a safety out and up with him to clear out space for Xavier Townsend to catch the ball, turn around, and get some yards. Rocco takes this like a 2-step drop, I think, fires it out towards, actually maybe just a 1-step drop, fires it out towards Townsend. It gets just slightly deflected at the line by a defensive end. and it goes a little offline, but not, but just, but just enough offline where Townsend can't catch it, but he sticks a hand out, deflects it in the air, and somehow by the grace of the heavens above, uh, Gabe Burkle happens to be right there, right when he needs to be, comes down with a super impressive catch, gets hit right as he catches it. It's pretty, it was a lucky play. I mean, straight up, it was lucky. And in past years, that's the type of play that gets deflected, goes straight to an Iowa safety. They burn out clock, get a field goal, and then make our life hell, and they win that game. Gabe Burkle was right there, right place, right time. It was great. Couple plays later, they get to a 3rd and 2, and Iowa State runs the tight end pop pass, which they've now run every game this season. Just a matter of when they're going to do it. But it has become, I think at this point, I think it's become Taylor Mauser's favorite play. Campbell actually talked about it in his press availability today. Someone asked him about, like, where did that come from? Why has that become such a big part of the offense? And he said it was because he ran in high school. He ran the wing T as a tight end, and he'd only get like a handful of catches every season because that's just not what his job was. But in a wing T offense, the way you get catches is with these little pop passes. Where the tight end kind of slips out of a run look, basically, and you just hit it right over top. And so because of that, Iowa State's running pop passes. So you can thank the wing T offense of Massillon High School in Ohio for Iowa State's pop passes. However, on this pop pass, Gabe Burkle once again displays, I would say, the pop pass, maybe probably the best catch of the season so far. And I believe Gabe has demonstrated he probably has the best hands on the team of anybody. So I'd like Rocco to get a bit better place on those pop passes. Gabe has had to make some crazy grabs in 2 out of 3 of them. That's exactly right. 2 out of 3 of them, he's had to make a one-handed grab, but behind his own head, basically, and kind of twisting back. It's remarkable that he keeps catching these things, but ideally, yes, Rocco gets those a little bit more on target going forward. But the play's working out. It's a great short yardage play. It's pretty wild. Matthew makes a good point. Maybe it's because of defensive lineman. So it's hard to tell sometimes because of where Rocco's at. And he has to make sure he gets it over top of a defensive lineman's probably outstretched arms. So it's kind of a matter of where he can get it. But I would agree. The last one on Saturday could have been more on target for sure. But I mean, Gabe Burkle I believe he's demonstrated the best hands of anybody on this team. He keeps making just amazing catches over and over and over and over again. And frankly, the only reason right now that he's not necessarily the Mackey favorite is because he is having to share his duties with Ben Bramer. Ben Bramer and Gabe Burkle currently combined to be 1.25 Mackey Award winners. And unfortunately, but they're getting split out. So they, I don't know if I think they're taking it enough away from each other that neither of them will win the Mackey Award, just because they're leeching targets and things like that from each other. But I don't think it's even arguable at this point that they're the best tight end duo in college football. It's been an incredible run so far. Yeah. This one's probably dead right. I will say that the one against Kansas State, Gabe got out of his break just a little slow, so he was kind of it was too far. It was too far for him to catch it clean because Gabe was behind on his break. I think he even said in the post game that he should have been faster coming out of that, because I think he got chipped by I want to say a linebacker or safety. He just got chipped real quick, which threw him off his route a little bit. I think if Gabe is full speed coming out of that into that pop route, then it's probably 6. But I think Gabe was a little bit slow on the first one, and then this one Rocco it was a little bit inaccurate. But either way, Bramer and Burkle are just an unbelievable dude. I mean, I think Burkle is a better tight end. It depends on what you're trying to do, but they're both. You're splitting hairs. They're good at different things, but I mean, Iowa State is spoiled to have. Iowa State would be spoiled to have one of them, but now they're playing two of them. I'd be curious to see PFF's breakdown of personnel. I know going into the Iowa game, Iowa State was leading the country in 12 personnel sets in percentage of plays run with 12 personnel. Even over Iowa at like 77% or something. But PFF, the what they buried the lead here was that up to the Iowa game, so this would be including Kansas State and South Dakota, they had only clocked 4 plays where Iowa State didn't have at least 2 tight ends on the field. Now, if you do the math, that's 97% of plays. Iowa State has at least 2 tight ends on the field. Where they buried the lead is that 20% gap between the 78% that they run 12 personnel and the 97% that has at least 2 tight ends. The lead they've buried is that 19 to 20% of the time, Iowa State is running 3 or 4 tight ends. They're running 13 or 14 personnel on 20% of their sets. That's a massive number. Most teams, I would bet, are somewhere around 5% or less. Probably some 0%, a lot 0%, most under 2%, and then there's just probably a small sect that goes to 5%. And then you have Iowa State running for 13 and 14 personnel 20% of the time. 20%. It's ridiculous. The receivers are definitely a point here that is worth bringing up. And it looks like Matthew did here. Do we maybe try and really get the receivers into rhythm against Arkansas State before Big 12 player? Just keep doing what we're doing. Generally, I hope so. Overy for sure could use some confidence throws, and it would be good to get Townsend's catches as well. So a couple points here on the last couple drives of the game. I think some very notable things happened. One, the main thing is that the last 2 drives of the game, for the most part, it was Chase Sowell and Xavier Townsend on the field. Eskildsen did have a catch on that last drive, I believe, but he had a target, not a catch. He had a target. But we saw both of the transfers on the field for most of the last 2 drives. Specifically, they started throwing balls to Chase Sowell. And the one in particular that really stuck out to me, it was his second catch on the last drive of the game. They threw just a quick out to him. I think, is it a quick out or a hitch? They hit him. He caught it. He turned around, and he was met immediately by the defender. Just bang. But he planted his back foot in the ground, and then from a dead stop, drove his defender back like 3 or 4 yards and turned a 5-yard catch into a 9-yard catch. And he got up and started kind of having a little attitude, he had a little attitude, talking, sort of not talking shit or anything like that, but just got up with confidence. And the type and like those passes were at a critical point in the game. They were critical throws that needed to be caught if Iowa State wanted to keep the ball moving and get points at the end of that drive. To me, having Sowell on the field, getting those targets, getting those catches, same with Xavier Townsend getting his touches, I think that tells me that they're getting ready to turn those 2 loose to really give them a heavy target game. That's what that felt like to me, is that we saw that was the breakout there. That these 2 they're getting ready to turn these 2 loose and get them 5, 6, 7 targets apiece. Now against Arkansas State, we'll talk about them in here a little bit. How often is Iowa State going to throw the ball against Arkansas State is the big question here, because Arkansas State just gave up 3 bills on the ground to Arkansas last weekend. Arkansas is like, okay, they're not great, and they don't have a great run game. They have a good quarterback in Taylor Green, but they don't really have a great running game. Not as a dedicated one, but they gave up 300 yards on the ground to Arkansas last week. And my guess is that Iowa State will be perfectly happy to try to get its run game going again. Especially like Abu Sama, who seems like he's just really close to starting having a really, it seems like he's really close to having, a 100-yard game with a couple touchdowns. And so we'll talk about that in a little bit. So, but as far as it relates to the receivers against Arkansas State specifically, my guess is that they will. My guess is that they will try to get them targets, especially early in the game. My guess is they will try to get them involved as involved as possible. But understand that they're not going to like keep throwing at them all game if Iowa State starts pulling away from Arkansas State. Iowa State is going to be perfectly happy to sit there and lean on the run game like they did versus South Dakota, or not. Well, I should not say not versus South Dakota. That was late in the game. Versus Kansas State, where you sit there and just lean on the running game and just try to chunk it out, go down, get a clean win. Don't turn the ball over. Don't do any weird shit. Just go down, dominate the game on the trenches, and get out of there with a couple score win and go into your bye week. Especially considering that it's supposed to be like 95 degrees on Saturday down in Jonesboro. So, keeping your defense off the field by running the ball is going to be really great. Totally agree here. Getting the O-line some successful run reps it'll be great. It sounds like the Trevor Burr may be coming back from his deal, from his illness or injury. They haven't really disclosed it. I'm pretty sure it's an illness. I believe it sounds like Trevor Burr may be coming back. Are they going to just shove him into the offensive line rotation? I don't know. I'm not sure exactly how they're going to manage that because the offensive line has been playing pretty well. And I'd really prefer to not upset that apple cart if you don't have to, especially just because they've been playing really well. I mean, they even looked pretty good against even Iowa's front seven, given how good they are. So I'll be curious to see how they manage that with Burr. I think Arkansas State's a team that you can probably get away with it a little bit more because you can kind of physically push them around quite a bit offensively, against their defensive line. So we'll see how they manage that. But I think if they're dead set on wanting to get Trevor Burr into the starting rotation, and they need to, get that going again. My guess is the best way to do this is probably going to be to introduce a steady dose of the running game, especially with Abu Sama and Dylan Lee and Carson Hansen. I think both of those. I think all three of those backs will get some carries. Dylan Lee later in the game, but this is a game I think on Down the Pipe on the podcast Down the Pipe and Natty Light this week. I predicted the player to watch on offense was Abu. I think he's going to go for like $125 and a couple touchdowns because I think he'll be able to break one loose. And I think they're going to make sure that they give him carries just to kind of get him going again. Same way with Carson. Since Carson had a really good game against Kansas State. The last two games he's been a little bit quieter. Did have a couple really nice individual carries against Iowa. It ended up with similar stats to Abu, but for Carson it was pretty much either like 10 yards or 0, 10 yards, nothing type of thing. So you'd like to even that out a little bit. But back to the wide receivers, I really like I think Chase Sola and Xavier Townsend are going to be getting heavier targets going forward. Get some against a weak defense this week, and then the bye week, you can really start working on getting them more ingrained into your play calling pattern and things like that for when Arizona comes to town. Because Arizona is going to come to town. One, I think they're a little bit better than people thought they were going to be. But two, they're going to be looking on tape and they're going to see a whole lot of Ben Bramer and Gabe Burkle, and they're going to be preparing for that. If you come out against Arizona and you start throwing to your 6'4" receiver Chase Soul and your lightning quick slot receiver Xavier Townsend, and they're not really ready to see what those guys can do, that is a huge advantage you can have over Arizona, where then they either have to decide to deal with those two receivers or try to cover the tight ends that have just been dominating through the first 3 weeks of the season, through hopefully the first 4 weeks of the season. So, you don't want to overlook Arkansas State, but offensively against Arkansas State's defense next week, you have an opportunity to try a few things while getting more touches for the guys that really need it, like Abu Sama, Carson Hansen, and potentially Trevor Bohr getting inserted into that offensive line. So, interesting thing there. I would be remiss to not talk about Kyle Conrarty hitting another game winner there. I mean, there's it like him hitting that field goal last year was unbelievable because his freshman season in a tough road environment, at basically just before time expires, essentially as time has expired. That's a critical situation. Nailed it. It was unbelievable. You come back this year, and while it was a game-winning field goal, I feel like the circumstances surrounding it were so much higher risk. Like the downside for him missing that field goal was massive. And because Iowa was going to have 2 minutes left to drive down the field. When I even drive all the way down the field, they would have taken it from like the 40-yard line or whatever, 42-yard line, and only had to get 20 yards before Drew Stevens is in range. But the confidence that this program and that Matt Campbell have in Kyle Conrarty is pretty remarkable. It's unlike anything we've seen in quite some time. The play call on third down, I was like 3rd and 8. The play call on that down I would say could have tried to throw into that Hawkeye defense, tried to pick up the first down and keep the thing moving and chop off more time. Instead, what they did was they ran QB power to the left-hand side, and they told Rocco to get as many yards as he could, get down in the middle of the field, hang on to the ball. Rocco did exactly that, got a few yards, and put it right in the middle of the field, right in the spot for a 54-yard field goal. And they did that because they had supreme confidence in their kicker. So, yeah. So you said this in the post game and you kind of talked me out of it, but I'm still not quite sure I liked playing for 50-plus yard field goal. Conrarty, incredible, but 50 isn't automatic. So, like, you're right for like basically every college kicker ever. Your logic is dead on. It's not automatic. It's not there. But one statistically speaking, Kyle Conrarty is actually better from like 45 plus than he is inside 40. Interestingly enough, like statistically, he makes his kicks more often beyond 40 than he does inside of 40. So for whatever that's worth, he appears to be a long kick field goal kicker. But it was into a steady wind, and for that reason, it was steady. And as any kicker that's kicked at Jack Trice Stadium will tell you, the wind really likes to swirl in Jack Trice, and it makes kicking really difficult. You had a steady wind. It was a headwind, but you had a steady wind, and you're in the middle of the field, and you can just sit back and launch it. And in that type of situation, I know me sitting in the stands, I was pretty sure he was going to drain that. Like I would have bet money in real time on him making that kick. Maybe I'm dumb for thinking that way. Maybe I'm being way overconfident. But it felt like a kick he was going to make because he had made so many more difficult kicks. And it was funny because in the stadium live, when he kicked that, it didn't look awesome off his foot. It looked like it was wobbly. I wasn't sure if we weren't sure if he was going to make it, if it was going to make it to the goalpost. It was kind of a weird deal. But okay, this I can get 100% behind. Like the third down play is QB to center it up, but would prefer passing first and second. That I think is 100% valid take. Because the first play was just a quick run to the outside, and the second play was a toss, was an option play to the near side of the field. I really did. The first run play I didn't hate. The second down play I really did not like, because the potential for how many yards that could have gotten was really low. Like, they were only ever going to get a few yards out of that at most, but Iowa blew it up the line of scrimmage. So I really didn't like that play. I get that they were trying to, reduce. Well, it's funny because I think they were trying to reduce risk by not throwing into the Iowa secondary, but then they ran an option play, which is, I would argue, a higher risk play than just throwing it. But I agree. I 100% agree with you. And I bet Taylor Mauser would agree with you too, that it would have been, in retrospect, it probably would have been a better idea to be more aggressive on first and second down to try to get yourself in a position to get another first down, versus being pretty conservative on the first two and then just being okay with whatever you can get on third down. I can be 100% on board with that take. And I even in real time, I totally agree with that. Where I felt like I was the second down play call in particular, the option to the out to the near side of the field, was particularly unsatisfying. I really thought they should have been more aggressive there. Oh, so on the broadcast, it got brought up that Mauser basically dumped his girlfriend because she made him choose between her and coaching Iowa State football. I have no reason to believe it's not true, I guess. John Haycock seemed to confirm that in today's media availability. I would imagine, I have a hard time believing that Fox would have shared that on the broadcast if it wasn't true. So I'm inclined, I have no reason to believe it's not true. And assuming it is true, that's like some all-time, like, duding it up for the clones type of shit right there. And it was funny. I think it was Gus Johnson that even said, like, as they say, bros before, or something like that. Which is a hilarious thing to throw on the broadcast. But, to kind of sum up the Iowa game here, all in all, it was an ugly game that Iowa forced them to play and forced them to win ugly. I don't think Iowa State played bad. I think there's a few plays that they'd like to have back. I know Dom Overby probably has a couple catches he would have liked to have back. Even if the throws were not perfect, they're throws that he would, they're catches that he would like to have back that he should have made. Brett Eskelson would probably want to have that back shoulder throw in the first quarter that he dropped. I think he'd want that one back. They didn't play perfect, but the defense was really good. I was especially impressed with the defensive line against Iowa's offensive line, which Iowa's offensive line is elite. They are very, very good. One of the probably 5 or 10 best in the country. Very, very good. And Iowa State's defensive line absolutely held their own all game with them. And Dominic Orange had yet another awesome game. If he's not in the running for some, individual awards towards the end of the season, it'll be a crime. But one guy that needs a shout out here, probably take the Kyle Conradi banner down. One thing that needs a shout out here, though, is Tomato McDonough. Actually, and Caleb Bacon also. Caleb Bacon did have a sack earlier in the game. And he had a one that was originally, basically negated due to a penalty by Zamir Hawk. Then he actually got one later. Then Thomas O. McDonough, game on the line, fourth quarter. I was trying to tie this thing up, and gets sacks on 2 consecutive plays, not just coverage sacks. I mean, he was in there, beat his offensive line matchup. Got around him. The second play, he did just a little swim move off to the side, getting, kind of cutting back into the pocket. Gronowski turned his head, bang. Thomas Olmodon was right there. Functionally sealed the game for Iowa State. It was an unbelievable play. I'm so happy to see him step up, have a moment for himself. And I think especially to me, that whole sequence there showed me, it answered a couple questions for me as far as the defensive line. Because I think the defensive line I think the defensive line was probably the biggest question mark coming into this season about just kind of what was going to happen. We knew about Dominic Orange, but we didn't know about anybody else. Like if anybody else was going to be productive. And I think what we saw there is that they've got the guys. This defense in general is never going to be one that uses the pass rush as the quote unquote an offensive weapon. They're not going to be attacking teams with the pass rush the way a lot of way 4-3 schemes are and stuff like that. They're gonna send three guys just to have a rush there to clog up the line a little bit, get the one, get a sack here and there. But they're not really a particularly aggressive pass rush team that's going to use it as a weapon. At least not since like Will McDonald was here and he was just a one-man wrecking crew. But what we did see against Iowa and against their very good offensive line is that when Iowa State wants to get a sack, when they need to get a sack, when they need to get pressure on the quarterback, they can dial it up. They've got the dudes and they've got the scheme to dial something up and go get one. So would it be nice if you could just send three every play and get to the quarterback regularly like you did with Will McDonald? Yes, obviously that would be great. But the defense isn't really built to do that aside from just having outstanding individual players. And Tom McDonald's right. Yeah, Will McDonald's is just a different caliber of player from basically everybody. But what we did see is that when they need it, this defensive line can be very, very good. The pass rush can be good when they need it to be. They're not going to bring 5 or 6 guys every play. They're not going to bring it most plays. But if they need to get a negative play, they can bring the 3 plus Caleb Bacon off the edge. This is a great thing. They stopped the line and let our beast at linebacker go crazy. This absolutely happened. Caleb Bacon got a sack there. They were able to get pressure when they feel like they desperately needed it. And I think that's the important part going forward. They've already played, I would argue, probably the 2 best offensive lines on the schedule, maybe 2 of the 3 best, depending on how you feel about like BYU's maybe. BYU or maybe TCU. But either of them are definitely behind offensive line wise they're behind Iowa and Kansas State. Now, granted, Kansas State's having a rough time, but first game, Kansas State was still a good team. So the defensive line gives me hope going forward that I think they're going to continue to grow, be an effective unit. Tom McDonough had a great game. We've seen Akeni Eziogu make some really nice plays in the Kansas State game. He batted a couple passes down from Avery Johnson. I think at some point we're going to get a good Vontroy Malone game. I think we're going to get a good game from Vontroy Malone at some point. I think this gave me some peace of mind that this defensive line, this pass rush will be good enough when it needs to be good enough. And that is good enough for this defense with the linebackers so good and the secondary is playing out of their minds. We should talk about the secondary too. For the second time in 3 games, Marcus Neal has graded out as I would say its best player on either side of the ball. He's in the 80s again. The emergence of the trio of Marcus Neal, Kyjon Cummings-Coleman, Tayshaun James, and then alongside Jamo Patton and Drew Surges and Carson Van Denter. The emergence of those 3 specifically of Neal Cummings-Coleman and Tayshaun James has been a revelation. Basically, all 3 of those are about 6'1", 215, and built like a brick shithouse. And those 3 playing so well is this. It allowed you to move Jeremiah Cooper over to corner, which he's playing well enough at corner now that you start wondering if we should have just played him at corner this whole time. Turns out that an All-American safety that gets a chance to jump on some passes near the line of scrimmage. Turns out he's a pretty good corner too. I'm gonna want to up you here. I believe Neal he's an All-American caliber talent. And I believe at some point he will be in the running for a Thorpe Award. Just based on in 2 seasons, I think in 1 or 2 seasons, I mean, maybe not this year, but next year or the year after, I think Marcus Neal is a Thorpe Award final, a Thorpe Award semifinalist or better type of guy. He's going to be very, very good. Kajon Cummings-Coleman is not far behind him. Tayshaun James, I don't know if anybody remembers this during the game or not, but he delivered one of the hardest hits I have seen in any time recently on Jazz Patterson on a run. We're largely out of the big hit era of football where guys are just out there head hunting, just trying to just put dudes in the hospital. We're not really in that era anymore because of targeting rules and things like that. But the hit he laid on Jazz Patterson, I was wondering how the Iowa player got up. I jokingly yelled from the stands, like, I think he freaking shit himself or something like that. But that was one of the hardest legal hits that I've seen on a player in a long time. That was an enforcer hit that, that's the kind of hit that makes an offensive player think twice about it the next time they run into that part of the field. And they're all of a sudden now they're looking around trying to find Tayshaun James to see if he's going to launch a missile at him again. Yeah. Was it Neal that jumped the screen and played the Iowa guy, laid the Iowa guy out? Yeah. So Neal blew up one behind Neal blew one up behind the screen. Reminds me of Yasheen Young a little bit. So it should remind you of Yasheen Young in that he is a big hitter that will lay the wood. I can tell you right now that Marcus Neal is head and shoulders above where Yasheen Young ever was as a player. I'm not disrespecting Yasheen Young, but Yasheen Young was basically a specialist run stopper at safety. He was not great in deep coverage. He made a few plays here and there, like against Oklahoma in 2020, in the first game. But for the most part, he was, I don't want to say he was a liability in deep coverage, but he was not strong in deep coverage. Right now, Marcus Neal is playing like a defensive player of the year in the Big 12 candidate. That is how good Marcus Neal is playing right now. He is, for the fans, he kind of came out of nowhere because he was really just a special teams guy last year. But holy cow. Like, that whole safety group has been great. This is a great point. Outside of those two plays in Ireland, the DBs have been very, very good. And the two plays in Ireland were two freshmen, Kajon Cummings-Coleman, Carson Van Dint, are both getting beat on double moves. Since then, Kajon Cummings-Coleman has largely looked very good. Teams have tried to go after him a little bit. I think South Dakota connected on one deep pass. But Kajon was pretty much right there. He really just needed to get his head turned around. He probably could have picked it. But for the most part, he's played very, very good. My guess is that Arkansas State will probably try to go after him a little bit in deep coverage. So I think we might really see how good he is in deep coverage this game, because I think Arkansas State will try to go after him. But Jontez Williams has been awesome. We basically haven't heard his name in pass coverage at all because no one's even bothered trying to throw at him. As we remember the famous stat of throwing the ball directly into the ground is 20 points of passer rating better than throwing at Jontez Williams. So we have not really heard from Jontez Williams in the passing game because no one's even bothered trying. And a couple people have tried against Jeremiah Cooper, and now Jeremiah Cooper has picked a pass off. Right now, Iowa State's secondary looks like darn near impenetrable at this point. They did try to go deep. Iowa tried to go deep one time. They got the pass interference because Bo Goodwin was somehow ended up in deep coverage. But that ball was not going to be caught. And depending on where guys ended up, I think the safety might have even been able to get back and pick that off even. So, Iowa's receivers are nothing to brag about. They're actually pretty fucking terrible. I'm perfectly willing to dump on Iowa here because the receivers are kind of an embarrassment to the sport. Jacob Gill seems like he's okay, I guess, maybe, but the rest of them are a joke. The Iowa State secondary was in their hip pocket every play, basically, which is why Mark Gronowski was having to run around so much on that last drive. but they're gonna run against better receivers later this year. TCU's got good speed. Arizona's got some guys here. Colorado has some guys. They're gonna see more speed, some better receivers in Big 12 play. But right now, it's the secondary is really fucking good. I do think, so Perkins has become a very good punter now. I feel like there's been a liability past years. I wouldn't say Tyler Perkins has ever really been a liability. He may not have been like a standout, but he always was like good enough. He never shanked one really. He didn't often stick stuff at the 10-yard line. He would just kind of send it into the end zone. So I wouldn't say he was a liability just so much as he just wasn't really a standout. He just kind of did his job and that was it. But this year, oh, not him. Yeah. Other punters. Yes. I think we're all reminiscing back to Corey Dunn. Nice guy. Not a great punter. Tyler Perkins has been very good through his career and he's having a really good season so far. He's done a really nice job pinning some punts deep inside the 20. I was worried about it because Caden Weegan is a really good returner. I was concerned about Weegan's returning abilities last Saturday. I mentioned on the down the pipe. I thought Tyler Perkins needed to figure out a way to deal with him. Turns out, Caden Weegan not only did he not have a big return, he was arguably a net negative in the return game because of that on that punt return where he ran backwards. The kick return he brought out of the end zone, they got stopped. They got blown up at like the 15-yard line. I think those guys are, Tyler Perkins and Kyle Conradi on kicks and punts did a great job of dealing with it, neutralizing it. The kick coverage did a good job of neutralizing Caden Weegan. So overall, I think Tyler Perkins had a good season so far. Injury wise, Gilbert Flora, they did. Gilbert, are you talking about like Jace Gilbert, the kicker? Or who are you talking about, Gilbert? Am I missing? Am I Gilbert? Which Gilbert are you talking about? Aiden Flora, my guess is he's probably an after the bye week guy, at least. I had heard it was a hamstring injury. I don't know to what extent or anything like that. My guess is he's after the bye week at minimum. If it's a hamstring, he could be out for a little while. It could be the Colorado game, maybe. If it's a hamstring and it's severe enough, it could be, it could be after the Arizona game before we see him. It could be Cincinnati, could be Colorado, something like that. We'll see. Carson Willich, it sounds like he's still pretty questionable. Kale Brzezina is going to play. Trevor Bohr is supposed to be back in some capacity. Jace Gilbert. I mean, at this point, no disrespect at all to Jace Gilbert. What do we like? Is there a role that Jace Gilbert would be filling right now that Kyle Conradi or Tyler Perkins isn't doing equally well, I guess? I don't personally see I don't personally see kicker Jace Gilbert as a particularly like notable missing guy right now, but River Peppers too. The show had high hopes for him and his speed. Hope he gets healthy. Maybe give him a shot doing something. Yeah, I mean River Peppers. I'm not sure what his deal is. I don't know if it's like an ankle or something like that. We haven't seen him. Granted, the only game we were going to see him was South Dakota, and I think he was still banged up at that point. I mean, I'm still fully on the River Peppers train whenever he's healthy, whenever he gets a chance to play. He's still a true freshman. You still got Abu Simon, Carson Hansen, and Dylan Lee in front of him. My guess is maybe if he's healthy and travels to Arkansas State, maybe you see him this weekend because I think obviously it's going to be able to run the ball and hopefully eventually, start pulling away in the third quarter and stuff like that to get like Dylan Lee some snaps. And if River Peppers, hopefully he gets some snaps there too. We'll have to see. I don't know too much about River Peppers' injury. I know he's been on the sideline. I know I believe he traveled to Ireland, but he didn't dress. So, he's a demon on my dynasty team. Yeah. I can't see him transferring, but if he did, then something went wrong. I can't see that happening, especially because he'll be in a red shirt and all that. Right now, River Pepper is just kind of, we'll see him when we see him, but if we don't see him, it's not a big deal. He'll redshirt. He'll be here next year. Let's talk a little bit about Arkansas State before I wrap this show up, because we're already just a touch over time. Arkansas State is a not great team. Offensively, they like to get up and down the field a little bit. Jalen Rayner, their quarterback, was he played last year against Iowa State. He's a dynamic athlete. He runs around. He can buy time in the pocket. He can beat you in the running game. He will throw picks. Their running game is decent. It's not great, but it's okay. Their leading running back is averaging like 2.8 yards a carry. But they have another guy that's averaging like 10. The real key here is you bottle them up, hold them to, a couple touchdowns, 2-3 touchdowns. Arkansas State's defense is really, really horrible. Last week, they gave up 300 yards on the ground to Arkansas State. I would imagine Iowa State's probably going to try to attack that there. This is a game where Iowa State should be able to go down, take care of business, dominate the line of scrimmage, get out of here with, a couple touchdown win. And hopefully you see, curious which backup quarterback we might see. Yeah, it'd be interesting. It sounds like Mansky played against South Dakota because Connor Moberly was hurt, from what I understand. I don't know if he's still hurt. He was on the sideline for the Iowa game, in pads. My guess is we'll see Mansky, because Mansky looked pretty good against South Dakota, and I think generally speaking, he's believed to be kind of the future of the program. Whenever Rock leaves, probably after next season. So Mansky would take over in 27. But, we'll see. It just either way, you just want to get to the game where you can justify putting in backups in the middle of the third quarter like they did against South Dakota. Ideally, that's where you're at. If the defense takes care of business, Iowa State should win this game by a few touchdowns. I think they're 21.5 point favorites right now, if you're into that thing, if you're into that kind of thing. And, I would guess Iowa State should be able to cover that fairly easily. So this is definitely just a go down, take care of business type of deal for Iowa State. One thing I do want to touch on before we wrap up today. So this past weekend, Iowa State had a pretty significant list of visitors come into town to visit for the CYHAWK game, as far as recruiting targets goes. Specifically, you had a number of 4-star recruits, actually. Let me just pull it up here real quick. They had a lot of guys in town. Let me see here. So this is from 247 Sports. Shout out Alec Bussey, who does a great job covering Iowa State. They had 4-star receiver Landon Bloom for the 20. These are all 2027 guys. 4-star receiver Landon Bloom. You have Isaiah Hansen from running back from Norwalk. You have 3-star borderline 4-star lineman from Dowling, Carter Barrett. Carter Barrett specifically is a really interesting prospect because he is holding offers from basically everybody. He's got an Alabama offer there. He's got Alabama, Arkansas, Kansas State, Maryland, Minnesota, Missouri, Nebraska, Ole Miss, Tennessee, Texas A&M, Wisconsin. Add a couple more on there, and you got a Johnny Cash song. And so he's a big time recruit as well. Couple other unranked guys from Pleasantville, from Sioux City East. James, there's kind of two big fish, besides the first two I talked about. The next two that are really big ones, Israel Abrams, who is the main quarterback target for the 2027 class. 4-star guy. He's got Wisconsin, Kentucky, Tennessee. I think I've seen a lot of coverage from the Wisconsin side of it via Iowa State 247 alum Nick Osen. Great dude, by the way. If you're at all interested in Wisconsin in any way, shape, or form, Nick Osen does a good job for them. But Israel Abrams, big target for Iowa State. quarterback for class, number five quarterback in the class. Dual threat guy. I had a chance to watch some tape on him yesterday. Does a great job improvising in the pocket, throws a good deep ball. Mechanics are a little funky, but not like necessarily in a bad way. Just they look a little weird. But it's stuff that's really, really easy to clean up. He's a high-end prospect. And then Will Slagle, who, as you can see, has a crystal ball to Iowa State. 4-star interior offensive lineman. He is the number 1 player from the state of Iowa, number 5 interior offensive lineman in the country in his class in 2027, and is currently has a crystal ball to go to Iowa State. And notably, that crystal ball actually is from one of the Iowa writers, for what it's worth. The fact that Iowa State is potentially the favorite for / definitely in the race for a guy like this is notable. This is a guy that, through most of Kirk Ferentz's tenure, this is a guy that goes to Iowa 10 times out of 10. And Iowa State being in the running for / maybe in the lead for the number 1 player in Iowa, who is an offensive lineman, instead of Iowa, tells you, I think, where the two programs are right now in terms of just like which one is more notable, which one is headed the right direction, which one is the better program right now. John Kurtz on a number of channels on YouTube. If anyone has ever seen John Kurtz, he's a Big 12 / Kansas State guy. He actually said on his podcast, I think it was yesterday, that Iowa State has passed. He believes Iowa State has passed in terms of the quality of the program. Iowa State has passed both Iowa and Kansas State right now. They're obviously our two main rivals. So what's worth noting here also with Israel Abrams is that while 247 does not have anything as far as a crystal ball on him, the On3, one of the other recruiting services, On3 does have a crystal ball in to Iowa State for Israel Abrams. So potentially Iowa State could have just turned this CYHAWK game into not 1, not 2, but maybe even 3, or potentially even a 4th, blue chip prospect, a quarterback, 2 offensive linemen, and a receiver. That would be massive. Massive. I know they already had like Jeffrey Roberts, the commit. He was at the game. They had a few other guys there as well. But if you were somehow to land the trio of Landon Bloom, Israel Abrams, and Will Slagle, that's a massive. This recruiting weekend goes down like in Cyclone lore as far as just the quality of players that you get on that recruiting visit, alongside how that game went and everything. In a game which, a lot of the dialogue this week has been about, whether or not if Iowa State is now kind of the quote unquote premier program in the state, which anybody that's been listening to anything that I've recorded in the last year and a half is that I have been beating the drum that Iowa State is the cooler program right now. And right now you could argue Iowa State is the better program. That if you're especially an offensive player within the state of Iowa, you're better off going to Iowa State right now because you're gonna have a better shot at the playoff, and the program just wins more right now. Yeah, Otts had some basketball prospects in town, and what better showcase could you ask to have for prospective recruits than that whole weekend with the crowd, with how the game went, the way the team fought back. Couldn't have had a better showcase for everybody. Interesting question here. Well, this will be the last one to do before I wrap up. How many years Kirk have left, or do they fire him? So Iowa cannot / will not fire him. Kirk will be leaving on his own terms. Will he get the Dan McCarney thing where they kind of just push him out type of thing and say, hey, it's about time? Maybe, but Kirk has earned the right to leave whenever he wants. They pretty much have to hang on to him for a while. They have to hang on to him as long as Kirk wants to be there. How much longer Kirk wants to be there, who knows? With as bad as this offense could be this year, like if the offense continues to be really horrible after they just paid Mark Gronowski $2 million to go there, he may feel like this season could be enough to break be the straw that broke the camel's back and make Kirk decide that the game has started to pass him by. I shouldn't say started to. The game passed him by a decade ago. He just, did a good job of somehow resisting it. But this may be the season to recognize that the game has started to pass him by and that his way of doing things is no longer the best way of doing things. So it could be the end of this season. But my guess is the max. I would set the over under on Kirk's years left in Iowa City. I would set the over under right now at 2.5. I think, but honestly, if at the end of this year Iowa is 5-7 or 6-6, maybe they miss a bowl game because the offense is just horrible and the defense has started to take a step back. I could see Kirk Ferentz and Phil Parker both retiring at the end of the season. Would not shock me. In which case Iowa is then entering as a scenario where they have the most critical hire in program history. Where if they get the hire wrong, Iowa can fall by the wayside and become Illinois. Illinois is a bad example because they're good now, but they can become an also ran pretty fast. I don't think Chris Kleiman would be. If you'd asked me like 3 years ago, if Kirk had retired 2 or 3 years ago, I think Chris Kleiman would be at the very top of Iowa's list. If after the 2022 season, Kirk retired right after Kansas State wins the Big 12 title, and Kirk and Iowa is looking for a coach in that offseason, Chris Kleiman is almost certainly the very top of Iowa's coaching candidates list. No doubt about it. And we're all having a bad time if that happens. However, since then, Kansas State is now falling apart. Their program is starting to lose some luster after, in a kind of a second wave after the Bill Snyder era. And, Kansas State fans are starting to lose some faith in Chris Kleiman. Kleiman's also very old. Not very old. He's old enough to retire. He had some family issues this past offseason. My guess is that this is Chris Kleiman's last stop. My guess is that when he's done, he's done. Depending on what Stoops, their answers range between hell fucking no and probably not, but that would be really funny. There is a 0% chance Bob Stoops comes back to coach Iowa. It's not happening. I guarantee you he is not interested in rebuilding that program because it's not a roster that one transfer portal class can fix. It's not. It's going to take like 3 years at minimum for them to overhaul that roster enough to be able to be the kind of team that Bob Stoops would want to be. Mark Stoops is a really funny name. Now, there's no reason for Mark Stoops to leave Kentucky. He makes a bunch of money there. There is no pressure on him to win whatsoever. It's about as cushy as it gets for a mediocre coach. But if Iowa did hire Mark Stoops, it'd be pretty funny because I think it would go very poorly. How long till CMC rumors to Iowa start? I mean, Iowa fans can start them if they want, but there's literally no shot. The only way that would even have a shot at happening is like somehow Kirk hangs on for 8 years and the Big 12 dissolves somehow and Iowa State gets left out of whatever, the SEC and the Big 10 break away and take some teams, but Iowa State's not involved and Campbell wants to coach at the highest level. And let's say Iowa goes and Iowa State doesn't get taken to that, like maybe that, but as in the current structure of things, there's no fucking shot. 0%. Kalen DeBoer would be a really funny one. The problem here is, Iowa Forms can discuss trying to get Campbell all they want. That's never going to fucking happen. Right now, I mean, what can Iowa offer him except for a little more money? like that's it. Iowa State offers him a path to the playoff, a supportive fan base, a roster he doesn't have to completely rebuild, and an AD, an athletic department, a university in a town that will bend over backwards to do anything he wants. There's no reason. There's no upside to Iowa that Iowa State can't offer him besides money, which we've already learned doesn't fucking matter to Matt Campbell. To Matt Campbell. DeBoer is a funny one because one, he's probably going to need a job. However, Alabama's roster is much closer. I don't think people realize the program overhaul that would need to happen, that will need to happen at some point whenever Iowa decides to hire a coach that wants to modernize things. I mean, we look at like what Luke Fickell has had to do at Wisconsin, completely rebuild the roster to, have a team that is capable of effectively throwing the football. So, and it's taken him multiple years, and it's been a rocky road so far. And frankly, it's probably in one of those situations where Luke Fickell does all the dirty work and eventually gets fired because he doesn't win fast enough. But then the next coach takes over and can take a couple tweaks and then is good with a Wisconsin Badgers team that throws the football. The roster overhaul required to modernize Iowa versus what Luke Fickell has had to do at Wisconsin is night and day. Iowa is so far behind, even where Wisconsin was in terms of modernizing their football team, their program, their roster, miles behind. This is not a 2-year project or a 1 or 2 year project for Iowa. This is a 5-year complete overhaul of the program to recruit and develop skill players and quarterbacks and whatever else. Because they're not gonna. Maybe they can get some duct tape players. If you brought in Kalen DeBoer, maybe you can get some duct tape players in the transfer portal. But you're going to be relying on duct tape solutions for 2 to 4 years, basically, before you can get the roster completely overhauled to where Iowa can be competitive as a modern football team. It's going to be a long, painful road for Iowa, and I hope it sucks. I hope it sucks. I hope they have a terrible time. I hope they slide into irrelevance and Matt Campbell just sits there and beats the shit out of them for a decade. I hope that happens because I want Iowa fans to experience the pain of being a bad football program and just getting completely demolished by their rival for a decade plus. I would love nothing more of them for that to happen. I hold deep and sincere animus against the Iowa football program. I want them to be miserable for as long as they can be miserable. I want them to be clear. So fuck the Hawks. We're going to win this weekend against Arkansas State, but the guys need to be ready to go. It's going to be hot. Fatigue is going to be an issue. Get it together. Get into this weekend, get a win by a couple touchdowns, get to your bye week, get healthy, get rested for the first time since the beginning of the season, then get started in Big 12 play and get off to a good start. Iowa State can be knocking on the door of the top 10 by the time Arizona comes to town. Let's do that. Once again, fuck the Hawks. Go Cyclones. Everybody have a great rest of your week, and we'll catch you guys again on Saturday after the game for a post-game call-in show. Once again, but we'll be right after the end of the game this time since it's an away game and not, a few hours after the game since I don't have to drive home this time. So everybody have a great rest of your week. Go Cyclones.